So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Member of Knesset Tzachi Hanegbi.
Thank you, Rob, for inviting me. Thank you, David. Thank you, Richie. You almost pronounced my name correctly. I can tell you that it's a good achievement. These two letters, Tzachi, do not exist in English. I'm married to, I'd say, a girl from Florida. We are married for 30 years. Her mother still calls me Kaki. So, so it's a definitely progress. And I want to thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here today. It's an invitation to speak before such an esteemed audience is always is honor to me. The reputation of the Washington Institute is recognized inside the beltways of both Washington, D.C. and Jerusalem, and I'm honored to be here. In the next 20 minutes, I would like to share with you my views on the national and foreign policy dilemmas facing Israel in the months to come. But before diving into the most pressing issues of the day, namely Syria, the Palestinians, Iran, I want to illustrate the historical context in which they can be viewed. In November 1947, 10 years before I was born, the United Nations General Assembly voted in favor of the creation of the State of Israel. Tens of thousands of Jews took to the streets in spontaneous celebration, overwhelmed with joy. Strangers kissed each other, hugged in the city squares, danced in the streets, waved the flag of the as yet unborn country. But not everyone took part in this outpouring of bliss. My mother, then 22, now she's 87 and one of the most admired public figures in Israel. She was serving also in the Knesset for many years. At the time, she was one of the daring fighters in the Irgun underground movement who opposed the British rule. Yet, on the eve of the renewal of the Jewish sovereignty in our ancient homeland, she wrote this in her autobiography. And that's a quote. From a rooftop in downtown Tel Aviv, I watched the crowd with an empty heart. The United Nations approved a Jewish state without Jerusalem, without Hebron, without Bethlehem, without Judea and Samaria. I could not share in the joy of the crowds below. I felt only the infinite grief of a slaughtered dream. In historical perspective, those who celebrated were justified. My mother and many others would have preferred to wait until their vision of greater Israel could be fully attained. They did not appreciate the advantage of realpolitik over lofty dreams. But leaders must come to terms with an imperfect reality. Years may pass before the wisdom and foresight of their decisions become apparent. David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, chose to accept the United Nations resolution, and paved the way for a Jewish state after 2,000 years of exile. Menachem Begin showed the same courage when he accepted Egyptian President Sadat's historic initiative for peace, even though it called for painful compromise. This is the time for me to welcome the nephew of President Sadat, who is here with us today. His name is Anwar Sadat, too. Mr. Sadat was elected to the Egyptian parliament, and I hope that him and I would be able to cooperate in the future and strengthen the peace between our countries. Thank you, Anwar, for being here. These two leaders, Ben-Gurion and Begin, represent a strong argument for political pragmatism. Our history, however, has also proved that such pragmatism can be ill-founded. The consequences of the unilateral withdrawal of Israel from Lebanon in the year 2000 and from the Gaza Strip in 2005 illustrate this. Many believe that the decision to withdraw has allowed for extremist militants to take over. Hezbollah turned South Lebanon into a fundamentalist Iranian proxy. Hamas turned Gaza into a terrorist launching pad from which tens of thousands of rockets and missiles and mortar shells have been fired at innocent civilians. Hopeful pragmatism versus sober conviction. These are the dilemmas facing Israel's leadership today. We ask ourselves, how can we be sure that our absolute commitment to security does not become the barrier to peace? And how can we guarantee that our willingness to break through existing barriers is not misunderstood and exploited? And what are the most critical issues? Those on which we cannot afford to compromise because the price would be unbearable. Israel has been dealing with such questions since its birth. In light of the current regional upheaval, they are now more demanding than ever before. With this background in mind, I'll begin with the country that has received the full attention of the world media this week, Syria. Since March 2011, Syria has been caught in chaos and anarchy. The civil war has claimed the lives of over 70,000. Hundreds of thousands have become refugees. Unlike Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Yemen, where regimes fell relatively rapidly, Syria's inner struggle has yet to be decided. The country is falling apart, and the Islamic forces that are flowing into Syria to battle the regime have made it a jihad arena. No one can say how long the struggle will go on. I believe that the fall of Bashar al-Assad regime will be an important positive development for the free world, for the United States, and for Israel. Syria under Assad has become a strategic partner of Iran, Hezbollah, and the Palestinian terror organization. Their alliance is a threat to the stability in the Middle East. Despite Syria's careful avoidance of direct conflict with Israel, in September 2007, the world learned that Syria, with North Korea's assistance, has built a nuclear reactor. The reactor exposed Syria's true colors, no longer a responsible, reasonable regime, but a force for profound instability. Syria sold its soul to the most radical forces in the region. As was the case with the nuclear reactor, the Middle East will be better off when the murderous Syrian regime is gone. Of course, such development will not be devoid of negative consequences. Syria may become a focal point for Islamic terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda. Muslim Brotherhood may gain political power and become a central force in the country. The relative calm that Israel has enjoyed along its northern border for decades may be disturbed. Assad's fall will also increase the danger that the Syrian army's advanced weapon system will fall into the hands of terrorist elements in Syria and in Lebanon. According to international media, such a danger has already forced Israel to take preemptive action. Obviously, I'm not going to discuss who was responsible for the recent strike in Syria, but I do want to say something about the reasons speculated upon by the media for why Israel might have been responsible. I didn't smile. The theories that Israel attempted to intervene in favor of the rebels or to send the United States the message that if you don't act, we will, are, in my opinion, absolutely untrue. Israel has no interest in becoming embroiled in the internal struggle, nor would it use such means to encourage an ally to do so. If it were true that Israel performed airstrikes in Syria, its only purpose would be to prevent the delivery of advanced, game-changing weapons into the hands of terrorist organizations like the Hezbollah. It is safe to assume that as Assad's chance of survival diminish, Hezbollah will increase its efforts to take control of strategic arms, including unconventional weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, and advanced Iranian missiles. While these consequences pose security risks, on the strategic level, the downfall of the Syrian regime will deliver a severe blow to Iran and its proxies. In the short term, the fragile status quo of the last few years will be shaken. In the long run, Syria's removal from Iran's orbit will greatly increase the chances for true stability in the Middle East. There currently seems to be no internal force in Syria capable of ending the inhuman massacre. Therefore, the importance of dialogue and cooperation between the regional countries, Israel, the United States, and Europe, is all the more vital. In the Palestinian arena, we need to restart the constructive dialogue with the Palestinian Authority after long years of standstill. The impasse has had many causes. The gap between the parties' positions still remains deep, even after decades of diplomacy. The division among Palestinians following the takeover of the Gaza Strip by Hamas has led Israelis to doubt Abu Mazen's relevancy as a reliable partner. The confidence in Abu Mazen has been further eroded by three developments. One, the fact that Israel's initiative to freeze construction in the Jewish settlements in Judea and Samaria for 10 months did not bring about a change in the Palestinians' preconditions. Two, the reconciliation agreement signed 2 years ago in Cairo between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. And three, the unilateral initiative by the Palestinians last November to be accepted as a non-member observer state in the UN. Despite these difficulties, I believe the conditions are ripe for a new attempt at breaking the deadlock. The elections in Israel and in the United States are behind us. The makeup of Prime Minister Netanyahu's new government signifies a more moderate approach than the previous one. President Obama has entrusted Secretary of State John Kerry with bridging the gap between the parties, and he has already demonstrated an ambitious and serious approach. This is why Tzipi Livni is not here, and I represent Israel here. They're making a lot of discussions, and the Secretary of State is pushing and trying to find the common denominator between the sides. The main reason for my careful optimism is that the two-state solution is widely accepted among both Israelis and Palestinians. Prime Minister Netanyahu publicly supports the idea while also emphasizing the necessary conditions for this vision to be viable. These conditions are not easy for the Palestinians to accept. Recognition of Israel as a Jewish state, the end of the conflict and of all mutual claims, strict security conditions and principles including demilitarized Palestinian state, renunciation of the Palestinian demand for the return of refugees into the state of Israel, and the preservation of large Israeli settlement blocks as part of a land swap agreement. I should emphasize that these are conditions for a viable agreement, not preconditions for negotiation. While the task is daunting, both sides are keenly aware that time is not in their favor. Many Israelis understand that a lack of a progress in the peace process might lend legitimacy to the one-state idea, which contradicts the vision of a Jewish and democratic state. Many Palestinians now realize that their successful maneuver in the UN has limited value. Their independence can be achieved only on the basis of direct negotiations with Israel, which will lead to an historic compromise that both sides can live with. My view is that the government of Israel needs to do all it can to help the American effort to bring both sides back to the negotiating table. There are unacceptable Palestinian preconditions whose purpose is to determine the outcome of the negotiation before they even begun. But there are also confidence-building measures that Israel can implement in order to enable Secretary of State Kerry's success. It will be, after all, not only his success. Millions of Palestinians and Israelis are hoping for it. We must give it a chance. And finally, Iran. In the past, there have been doubts as to the character and goal of the Iranian nuclear program. Perhaps the only positive development since this crisis began is that the differences in intelligence assessment have largely been ironed out. Today, all the leaders of the free world recognize that Iran's goal is to acquire a military nuclear capability, and that this goal is close at hand. We must admit that we are nearing the moment when the major players will have to make difficult decisions. The need to decide looms first and foremost over Iran's leadership. Other major decisions will be derived primarily from theirs. Some analysts believe that the identity of Iran's next president could influence its policy. I think that it's a naive expectation. In Iran, strategy is determined by the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and he is not going anywhere on June 14th. This is the day of the coming elections. Khamenei has had many opportunities to reach a reasonable settlement. Innumerable meetings, rounds of talks, back-channel negotiations, initiatives, and mediation efforts have come and gone. Up until now, there is no indication that Iran is considering any compromise. During the past 2 years, the international community, led by President Obama, has managed to unite around the strongest set of sanctions yet. All the organizations that monitor these developments are in agreement. The sanctions have had a profound effect on the Iranian people and on the Iranian economy. Unfortunately, there is no sign at all that these economic hardships are being translated into policy shifts. The Iranian resolve to attain the ultimate weapon of mass destruction has not been curtailed. The only time that Iran has ever halted its determined strive for the bomb was in 2003, when Iranian leaders feared they would become the third target in the United States' war on terrorism following Afghanistan and Iraq. It is therefore clear that a credible military threat could have a real influence on Iranian policy. In respect to the possibility of militarily preventing Iran from getting its nuclear bomb, Israel and the United States work on different timetables. This is due largely to the difference in capabilities of Israel and the United States, rather than a difference in the perceived capabilities of Iran. Simply put, the United States can act effectively after Israel cannot. So, if sanctions and diplomatic efforts continue to prove ineffective, and the only options left on the table are containment or the use of force, should Israel place its fate in the hands of the United States? Can Israel be assured that its closest ally will act in due time to remove the nuclear threat? My answer is no. Such assurance can be given by no president and can be demanded by no prime minister. Israel does not and should not expect such a commitment. Israel's bond with the United States is unbreakable, and the threat posed to our nations by nuclear Iran is mutual. But at the end of the day, we are each beholden to our own national security policies and priorities. Just as no president can commit to military action unconditional of his own nation's best interest, so can no prime minister forsake his country's inherent right for self-defense. President Barack Obama, during his recent visit, I would say successful visit to Israel, reiterated that Israel must be able to defend itself by itself against any threat. And all of us in Israel thank the President and appreciate this message of support. Thank you very much.